The other day, someone asked me how I organize my layout code when I'm building the UI programmatically using UIKit. So I thought I would make a quick video walkthrough of kind of my progression learning this stuff and a bunch of things that I've tried over the years, and then end up with kind of what I do now, what my organization looks like right now. I am not going to look at how auto layout works, and I'm not going to make an argument for why you should lay out your UI this way. If you love storyboards, that's fine, run with them. Different methods work for different people. All I'm trying to do here is share what I've tried and kind of what I've landed on for the time being. So first, this is the UI that we'll be building. Just kind of a basic login screen with the username, password field, and a login button. I tried to keep it simple just to move quickly through these examples. So let's first make a new project in Xcode. It'll be an app. I'm just going to call it Programmatic UI. Storyboard and UIKit. Don't need core data or tests. Just going to throw it on the desktop. Cool. So first thing we need is 2 text fields and a button. So I'm just going to make those real quick. I like to make them private because no one else needs access to them usually. We're going to have a button. It'll be type custom, just because that makes some things easier later. Okay, so the first method I learned was kind of to use these methods on NS layout anchor called constraint. That looks like this. First, you have to add the view as a subview. So we're going to say add subview, username field. We're going to add all of these fields. Cool. Then we have to tell it not to translate auto resizing mask into constraints for some legacy reasons. So for each of those, I'm going to turn off translates auto resizing mask. Let me close this to give us a little more space. You don't really need to see the mini map. Cool. So that way we'll actually use the constraints that we define. I'm going to start with the password field because that is the center of the screen. So I'm going to tie that to the center first. So password field, we need the center Y anchor. We're going to constrain it equal to the view's center Y anchor. So this method will return an NS layout constraint, which is discardable. Doesn't say that here, but it's not going to yell at us for not assigning it somewhere. But what we're going to do with that constraint is it has a property called isActive. By default, it's false. So we need to set that equal to true. Then, so this is us making a constraint between this anchor and setting it to active. Then I'm going to tie it 20 points from each side. As a leading anchor, we're going to constrain that equal to the view's leading anchor. And we'll do the same thing with the trailing anchor. And since this code is identical other than just these 2 points, I can do that. The shortcut to drop multiple cursors is Shift Control. So click where you want the first one and click where you want the second one. Then we're going to do the same thing with the username field because it's the same width. So I'm just going to copy these and again drop 2 cursors and call this username field. Then we want to tie the bottom of the username field to the top of the password field. We have 8 points of separation there. So to keep it from having a negative constant, I'm actually going to make the constraint from the password field. Its top anchor should be constrained equal to the username field's bottom anchor with a constant of 8. Let's go ahead and close this too, I guess, just to give us a little more space here. These are kind of long. Okay, so that gets us those 2 pieces. And I think if we run it, let's get a 12 Pro here. Should get us pretty close. Obviously, it's not going to look right yet because we haven't done any of the configuration, but the constraint should be right. Well, while I'm waiting on that, I'm going to do the constraints for the submit button. So the submit button, I'm basically going to have this same constraint, but for the submit button. So I'm just going to copy that. This should be the submit button, and it's going to be tied to the password field. So the top of the submit button is tied to the bottom of the password field with a space of 8. Then the center is going to be equal. So I want to center it horizontally. So I'm going to say center X anchor is constrained equal to the view's center X anchor. Set that active. And then I just want a width of 200. So we're going to set the width anchor to be constrained equal to constant 200. Cool, let's see. Maybe there are fields there. Yeah, so they are there. They are not. Oh, I tied them directly. So we need a constant here on the leading side of 20. And on the trailing side of negative 20. Same deal on the password field. Okay. And let's set our view's background color to be the secondary system background, just to differentiate a little bit. Okay, so let's do some setup here. So we actually need to put stuff in there so we can see it. So we're going to add a placeholder for the username. And we're going to set the border style to rounded rect. We're going to do the same thing for the password field. And while we're at it, we're going to set the content type to password. And the is secure text entry equal to true, so that it will hide the password as it's being typed. For the submit button, we need to set the title to log in for normal. We're going to set the background color equal to system blue. And we're going to set the corner radius of the layer to 8 to give us those rounded edges. Okay, so now our code should look pretty similar to our prescribed layout here. Okay, so that works. This is all good. We have achieved our layout. But all of this code is in our viewDidLoad method, which is not great for readability or reusability. So let's see what we can do to make it better. The first thing I would do in this case is define a couple helper methods that we'll just put this same code into to get it out of viewDidLoad. So first, I'm going to add a private configure method and a private constrain method. This is the signatures that I've come up with that I use as kind of my standard go-tos. You can call them whatever you want, but the point is you put code that's related to constraining in this method, and you put code that's related to configuration in this method. And then I just need to call those in viewDidLoad. Now I didn't write func. Now our layout should look identical, but it's a little bit easier to read. Our viewDidLoad method, especially if there's more logic that needs to go in there, is cleaner. We just see if we need to add logic before or after the configuration and the constraining. We can do that a lot easier than having to look through that huge block of code. And these are kind of isolated. If you have the code folding turned on, you can collapse this down so you don't have to see it while you're looking through, and you can jump specifically to those methods if you need to. So that's a little better. Just as kind of an aside, one thing that I did for some time is, instead of declaring my fields like this, I would make them private lazy variables. And set it equal to a configuration block like this. And then I can do all of this configuration in here. So text field that, actually let's just copy and paste it. That would get it out of this configuration method. It keeps this from getting super long, and it puts it all right at the declaration. It also makes it so this text field is not initialized until view.did_load is called, whereas with this method, these are all initialized as soon as you initialize this view controller, which is not always the most efficient method. But what I don't like about this is that it adds a lot of code around the declaration of these variables. You're tying this like configuration code with these declarations, whereas this is a lot easier to read. Like, what UI elements do I have in this view? I can see I have 2 text fields and a button really clearly and quickly. Whereas if you have a bunch of these blocks all down your code, it's a little bit harder to read. This puts all the configuration code together, and there are some other abstractions you can do if you have commonly used configurations to make this a little bit shorter. So I don't do this anymore, but it's a fine method if you want to do that or something similar. Okay, but the next thing that I actually do is I heard some talk at some conference, I don't remember which one or from who, probably more than one, where someone said you should only do view-related stuff in the view, not in the view controller. And that made a lot of sense to me, so I started defining custom views. So I would do something like this. We're going to add a new file. Doesn't really matter. We're going to call it login view. Let's close that back up. So in here, we're going to import UIKit so that we get access to UI view. We are going to make a class login view. And basically port these things over to that. So we need a private, I'm just going to copy and paste all of this stuff. Method. Now this was accessing the view controller's view, which is going to be this view. So I don't need view in any of these places anymore. Now that should work. I'll compile. No. Oh, that's because I don't have any of these fields. So let me just copy these over as well. There we go. That'll compile now. Okay. Now I like to put these in the initializer so that I know that they're called when this view is initialized. So to do that, we're going to override this init from frame. Init from frame. We're just going to pass the frame through. And then we're going to call configure and constrain. Now this won't compile because we don't have the required initializer. So we'll just take autocomplete's fix there and throw an error if someone tries to initialize this from a coder. I believe this is only done when you're initializing from a storyboard. It may also be done when you, I don't know. I don't really know what all this is used for, but I think it mostly has to do with initializing from a storyboard, which we're not going to do because this is programmatic view. So we can just throw a fatal error here. So now we have all this stuff in our view. how do we use it in our view controller? So what we're going to do is, why am I not looking at the view controller? There you go. Okay. We're just going to have a content view, which will be our login view. And actually, we're going to do what I said before. We're going to make this lazy. The reason we're doing that is so that this doesn't get initialized until load view is called, which we're going to override here. And we're going to set view equal to content view. That's all we need to do in there. Then we can keep our override of view did load if we need to do stuff in there, but in this case we don't. So we're just going to get rid of all this stuff. See how much cleaner that makes the view controller? So we've got all the actual layout code in the view, and we've got in the view controller nothing regarding the layout. We can have our logic for controlling the view here. But this should work just fine. Let's double check. Yep, still lays out good. Okay. So the next step that I experimented with at one point is trying to get rid of this, having to override the initializer in every UI view subclass and having to provide this required initializer just to get this configure and constrain method in. So what I decided to do, and what has worked for me pretty well, is to just define a UI view subclass that makes this unavailable and provides these methods as a template so that I don't have to do any of this in my actual views. They're just all done in the superclass. So what that looks like is we're going to make another view. This one's going to be called programmatic view. You could call it whatever you want. Just trying to keep the name clear of how it's used. So again, we need to import UIKit. And this will be a class called programmatic view. It's going to be a UI view subclass. Now, in here, we're going to provide the required init. Actually, I don't know why it didn't autocomplete. Let's just do the init from frame. We're going to do the same thing as we did before. Call the super init from frame. And we need a function called configure. And a function called constrain. So that we can call those. Cool. Now again, this won't compile because we don't have the required initializer, so let's just throw that in there. What I'm going to do here is mark this as unavailable by saying on any platform, this is unavailable. And we could throw a message in here saying, don't use init coder. Override init frame instead. So if other developers try to use this, they'll see our message. And what this does is makes it so that we don't have to provide that in subclasses of this view. So now that we have this, and these template methods will fill in our subclasses, and we just know that they'll get called in the initializer. So what we can do here is say this is no longer a UI view, this is going to be a programmatic view. And we can get rid of all this. Boom, get that out of here. And then we just need to change these to say override. And I believe this will compile and run. Our layout looks the same. Look at that. Cool. So now, again, this is all just in an effort to get noise out of the view. So when I come to look at this view, I can see these are the parts that make it up. Here's how it's configured. Here's how it's constrained. I try to keep my constraints reasonable and orderly, just like everything else. But if you need to look at the login view, you can come here. You can see it's a programmatic view. It's intended to be laid out programmatically. Here's all the parts of it. The view controller has a login view as its content view. That's all I need to know. Next, at some point, I learned about a function on NS layout called activate, NS layout constraint called activate, where you can give it an array of all these constraints, and then you don't have to, it'll activate them all at once, but mostly you don't have to write is active on each one, which again gets rid of some more noise. So before we do that, I'm going to add a couple helper methods that will turn this 3 lines into 1 line. Well, actually, it will turn this 6 lines into 1 line. So again, let me add a new file. This is going to be extensions on UI view. Again, we need to pull in UI kit. UI view. Okay, so first we're going to add a function to add a constrained subview. So what this is going to do is take that view and set translates. Why is this not good? Oh. Translates auto resizing mask into constraints equal to false, so we don't have to do that every time. It'll just do it, and then we're going to add it as a subview. Next, we're going to add a method called add constrained subviews, which takes a variadic argument of UI view and just loops through each of those. And adds them as a constrained subview. Cool. So what this does is lets us take this line, these 6 lines, and turn them into add build add constrained subview username field, password field, and submit button. This should do exactly the same thing as these 6 lines before. Boom. Our layout looks the same, so we've condensed that a little bit. Now we're going to bring in NS layout constraint. So to do that, we're going to say NS layout constraint activate. This takes an array of constraints. So I'm just going to highlight all these, and there's a shortcut to bump them up a line, which I believe is Command Option left bracket. I don't actually know the keys. It's all muscle memory at this point. And what we need to do is drop cursors, get rid of all the is actives equal to true, and put commas, because this is an array. But we can leave spaces if we want to keep clarity in there, which I'm going to do. and you can even have a comma at the end. So that turns that block of constraint code into this one array of NS layout constraints. And it makes it a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to write. You don't have all those is actives. You just can add things in here pretty easily, get rid of them, whatever you need to do. And that should run and look exactly the same. Okay, it does. Rock on. The next thing we can throw into the mix is stack views. So one thing we could do here is add, because we have 3 elements that are all just kind of in a stack, we can add a stack view. We'll need to configure that as well. So we're going to set the axis equal to vertical. We're going to set the spacing equal to 8. Both of these I think are the defaults, but I like to be explicit in my code so it's clear, and if we needed them to be different, we could set them. And because this element doesn't take the full width of what will be the stack view, we need to set the alignment equal to center and provide widths for all of these. Another way you could do it is to put a nested stack view inside of the stack view, but I'm not going to do that for this. Or you could make the button full width, and then you wouldn't need to do this either. You could just use fill as the alignment. Okay, so what do we need to do? First, we need to add a constrained subview of the stack view to this view. And then we need to add as arranged subviews all these other views to the stack view. So we're going to say stack view add. It has by default this method called add arranged subview, which takes one view. We are going to make a similar helper on that so that it can take a variadic argument. So same deal here. We need to pull in UIKit. This is going to be a function called add arranged subviews. And we're going to do exactly the same thing as before. We're going to loop through each of those and add it as an arranged subview. So there we go. Now our code should compile. But we need to swap up our constraints a little bit. So first thing, we're going to, let's add constraints for the stack view. So we're going to set the leading anchor, constrained. Actually, we're basically just going to copy these 3 constraints from the password field and apply them to the stack view, because it should be centered vertically and it should be 20 points from both edges. So I'm just going to copy those 3 constraints and apply them to the stack view. So the stack view, which is holding these 3 views, will be constrained the same. Then we need to have widths for our other 3 views. And these I want to take the full width of the stack view. So we're going to say constraint equal to stack view.width. We're going to do the same thing for the password field. And the submit button already has a width anchor. We just need to get rid of these other 2. And there we go. That should be all the constraints we need. to get that same layout. Cool. Now that already looks a lot cleaner than where we started. We have all of our layout code in our view. In addition to the configuration, we have 12 lines of code here that's doing all of the layout for this one view. But I will usually go a step farther when I have the luxury of being able to pull in third-party dependencies. I really like this framework called Anchorage. So we can add a Swift package dependency. I'm just going to search for it. Anchorage. They support Carthage and CocoaPods, I think. It's this one by RightPoint. The defaults are fine. Boom. Okay, so then we just need to import it. So what Anchorage lets you do is write constraints with operators, and it also gives you some proxies for doing things like setting the horizontal anchors or all the edge anchors or the size anchors at the same time to reduce some redundant code. It also sets translates auto resizing mask into constraints to false for you, so we don't have to have this custom extension if we use it. The main downside to it is that it increases compile time a little bit because of some type checking. It uses overloaded operators, so that increases compile time, but it's really not a big deal unless you have a huge project and they are doing some work to make that better. You can see their latest release for that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add another extension that doesn't constrain the views. So basically this function, but without constraining it or without turning this off. So this will be func add subviews. And it's going to say views for each add subview view. You don't have to do this if you don't want. So let me show you how we would build this view without using a stack view. So I'm just going to comment these pieces out. We're going to just going to comment all this out, honestly. We're going to add subviews. So this is our view is adding these three subviews directly. We're going to build the same constraints that we had before. So our password field, center Y anchor, is going to equal the view center Y anchor. And the password field's horizontal anchors are going to equal the view's horizontal anchors plus 20. So what this does is set the leading anchor to plus 20 and the trailing anchor minus 20 in one line. So then we need our username field. Its horizontal anchors are also going to equal the view's horizontal anchors plus 20. We need to add the password field's top anchor equal to the username field's bottom anchor plus 8. And then we need the constraints for the submit button, which is going to be the same constraint. Top anchor equals the password field's bottom anchor. 8. We need its center X anchor equal to the center X anchor of this view, and the width anchor. Submit button width anchor equals 200. Cool. So this is how we would write our original constraints without the stack view in Anchorage. Again, I hope you can see how much nicer this is to both read and write. There's another proxy like this called edge anchor. So if you're tying all 4 edges to its super view with the same constant, you can do that as well. That turns 4 constraint lines into 1. So that's, again, way faster to write and way easier to read, in my opinion. Okay, let's run this and make sure everything builds and that it looks the same. Cool. So that's working. That pretty much brings us to what I do now. So I use Anchorage when I can, and in addition to that, I make subviews for commonly reused views. So let's say, for instance, this stack of 2 text fields and a login button is going to be reused multiple places in the app. I think most apps probably don't need to reuse this particular view, but for sake of example, we're going to pull that out to its own view and then have this whole view just add that component to the middle. So the first thing we need to do is add another new view. This will be login stack view. And same as we've been doing, login stack view. It's going to be a programmatic view. We're basically just going to copy all this stuff over, except we're going to rewrite it to use the stack view. So let's uncomment the stack view. Well, let's just copy it first. Well, it doesn't matter. We're just going to copy all of this stuff over to here. And basically we need to turn these constraints into Anchorage constraints. So we're going to add a subview, stack view, and we're going to have the stack view add arranged subviews. We don't actually need those, so what we're going to do here is have our stack views edge anchors equal to the edge anchors of this view. Oh, we need to import Anchorage, so that's why these aren't compiling. Cool. Then we want the usernames horizontal anchors equal to stack views horizontal anchors, or width. We could do width here. Either one will work. We're going to do the same thing with password field. And the submit button will stay 200. So that's all the constraints that we need to duplicate this. And I think everything else should be fine. Then in our login view, we're just going to have a login stack. We really don't. Oh, we can get rid of this system background because maybe we don't want that in one of our places where we're using it. But here we're going to still set it to secondary system background. And then in here, we just need to say add subview login stack and login stack dot horizontal anchors. Plus 20 because we want it to come in from the edge. And center it vertically. I don't know why this is not showing me autocomplete. There we go. So again, this would let us compose multiple subviews in this view if we wanted to pretty cleanly. This is obviously very simple because there's just the one component in there. And it would let us reuse this login stack in multiple other places very simply if we wanted to. So this is still showing us the login view. So this should look correct. Cool, look at that. We have our username and password. We have our login button. We have now this reusable stack view. So this is probably closest to what I actually do in real life, making reusable subviews like this wherever I can for things that are actually reused throughout the app, and then composing them using the same methods in a screen-by-screen basis like this. Now, if you're wondering how we pass information back up, so how would we track this username and password field and when this button is tapped, check out my video on delegation because that's basically the other half of this. So I use delegation to delegate from the view back up to the view that it's composed in or to the view controller. And the view controller actually makes the business logic decisions about what to do with that information. So there you have it. That is basically kind of the journey that I have taken over the last couple of years, from first learning how to define a constraint programmatically to how I actually organize that code today. When you get down to it, what the code is actually doing is still very similar. Obviously, our configure method stayed pretty much the same, but the constrain method has gotten a lot simpler, more reusable, way easier to read and write, and it's faster to build things because I can pull in components that I've already defined, or turn one line into, or turn 4 lines into 1 line with something like this, which it's not all about reducing code lines, but when you're building the UI, it's much faster to write this line than it is to write all the individual constraints, and that can increase your productivity. You're not wasting your time rewriting boilerplate over and over. I hope that has been helpful for you and maybe given you an idea or two of things that you can try applying in your own code. If you have questions or ideas for how I can further improve things, let me know in the comments. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.